We're here with Allan Baker, author of BLIS for Insomniacs again. Now, in this video, we're not actually going to look at those techniques, but we're just going to talk a little bit to you, Allan, about how you came to develop the new technique. So we've already covered off in the other video that you spent a number of years as a psychologist with the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and how that actually shaped your professional career. And so why has sleep become such an important topic for you?
Well, it's not just for me, Alan. It's for about 20% of mankind, from what I understand. Certainly in the first and second world countries. Third world countries, they have got other things to worry about, I guess. But there are two aspects within the flying world which are actually very important. One is to do with fatigue, and we understand pretty well how to mitigate the effects of fatigue, particularly around long haul flying. And there are a lot of protocols in place that airlines observe in order to ensure that the pilots are flying at their optimum. The interesting aspect for me is rather related to the long-term health impacts on pilots of disturbed sleep. And it's not just pilots, of course. Anyone who is working in the small hours of the morning runs a very high risk of developing a range of health complaints driven from disturbances to their metabolic system, but also things that have implications for inflammation, for heart disease, and as I say, for metabolic conditions like diabetes. We've known for a long time that pilots' life expectancy after retirement is not as great as the general population. Mm. And so the emphasis in the last 20 years or so, of course, has been around fatigue mitigation. And I'm very interested in that. But beyond that, as a long-haul pilot said to me recently, he said, Al, I can get the rest that I need in order to mitigate fatigue and be ready to fly the next sector. What I'm worried about is the thrashing around that I do in the hotel when I can't sleep, and also the impact of being awake in the small hours. And a heck of a lot of flying, until recently of course, was done between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. And that's the danger period for being awake. Mm. That's where the brain-body system needs to engage in all of those activities that lower those risk factors for those things that I was just talking about. So I became very interested in ensuring that I could develop a technique which almost guarantees that you'll be able to get sleep when you want to be able to take it. And I think that's a real breakthrough. Look, it's a breakthrough partly because of the particular approach that I set myself as a goal. And one of those goals was to say, if I was successful in taking sleep as a skill, then it would have to be an active process, something that a set of things, a set of techniques that you could employ that would bring on sleep. And one of my frustrations in attempting to help pilots until this breakthrough really concerned using conventional advice, which, when you boil it down, sleep hygiene techniques and the other set of techniques around, well, how do we control our thinking and our emotions so that they don't get in the way of sleep, are essentially very passive processes or passive techniques. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean you eliminate all those things, and what's left is sleep, your hope. What I've done is, as well as coming up with a new take on those things, sleep hygiene and the thinking and emotional factors that prevent sleep. And I'm not saying they're not important, because they are, but they're not sufficient. And what's been missing is an understanding of how to shift a state we characterize called activation, which is basically the gross electrical activity of the brain as it moves from consciousness, which we're in now, where we're full of alpha waves, about 32 hertz, through to delta waves, which are very slow wave phenomenon. And my technique enables the active solicitation of delta waves, and in that sense it is a breakthrough. There was no doubt that I did have a eureka moment when I combined the experiences that individuals were relaying to me, particularly when I was using techniques to do with the elimination of the effects of trauma. And I then combined some of those experiences with a very deep literature search, which led me to discover that some of the byproducts of that trauma alleviation technique or mitigation technique actually had very strong implications for how the brain goes to sleep.